Hi there. We're back for another installment of the Razorback screencast. This time we're going to be looking at the robotic arms, and in an effort to keep the screencast shorter, which is pretty difficult to do, I'm going to be focusing just on the layout of the arms, and the next video will actually get down to making them. Before we get into that, I realized that I made a bit of an error right here. The fact that this infrared array is so low down is going to cause travel issues with the front suspension. It should go no lower than this part of the triple tree. So the first thing I'd probably want to do is move this instrument higher up like that, and we just take this LiDAR unit right here, probably sit it up on top. I think that should do the trick. And then of course we'll just need to shorten up this object right here. Something like that. So I'm just going to save my work and let's start to talk about those arms. The robotic arms are going to have two goals. Goal number one is that they need to be able to stretch outwards in this direction. A lot of the attacks this machine does in the novel are drive-bys. So it would need to extend one of its arms with a blade and perhaps slightly articulate the blade while moving past its target to inflict the sort of damage it needs to. The second thing is that it needs to be able to replace the blade. Now we have our spares right here. So this proves an interesting challenge. This means that the arm is going to have to swing outwards and then reach back around to itself to click into one of these blades. You can then remove it from the machine. So what I'm thinking is we have a pair of arms with, let's get the doodle tool. I'm thinking we have a pair of arms that are mounted here. 1, 2. The arm can then swing outwards in this direction with a pivot here. We then have another pivot that comes back this way. And then finally we have the end of the arm where the tool is. Now, this tool is probably what would hold the blade. So we'd have something that looks like that. Obviously a little bit smaller. I've just exaggerated it for size. Now because this is an articulating section here, this can probably swing over 180 degrees in this direction, making the tool exposed part of the arm face inwards, and then the arm may be able to articulate inwards and click into one of these. That's my hope. I'm not sure how easy it's going to be, but we'll see. So I guess the first step would be to create rough cubes representing the shape of these segments of the arm. So let's start with the base. I just created a cube. I'm moving it up here. And we do have a size limitation. It can only be so big. Space is becoming a real problem on this machine as we pack in batteries and motors and blades and equipment. So what I'll do, just to give us a good idea, is I'll keep everything to the right of the blue Z-axis line. That way we can sort of imagine that this is our base and that's our limitation. And you can see right here that I've set it up so that we can actually have two. So if this is the base of our arm, there needs to be a way that the arm can face outwards. Typically a robotic arm faces up, down, and then reaches onto a conveyor belt to do something useful. In this case, I think we want to add another degree of freedom. The easiest way to describe what I mean is probably to show you. So I'm going to create another cube, and this cube is going to be positioned like so. This is going to be the base arm. I've actually done a short animation of a robotic arm for a web magazine that I wrote for a long time ago, and I recently revisited that project with some new inspiration. So that's also available on my website. I think I have a YouTube video. So if this is the base arm that holds everything, let's imagine for argument's sake that it's actually closer to the center, and it pivots like this, then theoretically we could take the base and pivot it. So what I'm thinking is that we could move the center, move the origin of this cube. So I'm just going to hold down L, and I'm going to move the origin down to the edge somewhere here, just so that the cube's center is at its edge. What I'm thinking, and I haven't given this a lot of thought, is that perhaps the arms could rotate like this, pointing them outward. Now, as we can see, it doesn't really give us a lot of freedom if we do it that way. The challenge is that they need to be able to hang outwards like this, but then they also need to be able to go back to their standard position, where we might fold this part of the arm forward and the following part of the arm backwards, to sort of fold them away so they can be tucked away for high-speed chases or just general maneuvering. So that would probably look like that, where the arm would need to be offset, because that's how these machines usually store things. And by the way, when you see my screen flip around like that, it's because of the screen recording software. I think sometimes it hijacks the mouse movement, and then the mouse movement gets amplified instantly, and everything just sort of spins out of control. Pay no attention. So this secondary arm, just so that we can keep track of it, I'm going to make it taper a little bit. I'm going to make it a little bit longer. And at the end of this arm is probably where we'd have our tool. Now that I've actually mocked it up in 3D, I see that we have a problem. I don't think we're able to articulate this arm enough to put this one at 90 degrees like that. So I think what we're going to have to do is assume that the robotic arm lives at 90 degrees. So the standard position for the arm would be facing outwards like this. The standard position for the second arm would be like that. This would allow the robotic arm to move its main fixture like that, and it would also allow for moving the secondary arm like that. And that's a lot of freedom right there. However, there are scenes in the book where the machines are hacking at something in front of them. So this is important. The arm needs to be able to do that. So let's take it back to the position we had it at before. I'm sorry if you were expecting a lot of 3D modeling in this screencast. This is really more about the setup of the arm and how to approach the issue. I didn't want to do too much of this work off camera, because, off screen recording, because then I would just need to do it all over again in front of you guys, and I was afraid that my original thought process would get lost. So let's make a wall. Let's say it's 8 inches thick, and it sits in front of the motorcycle. So this bike is basically driven up to a door or a wall that it needs to tear apart, or at least breach in some fashion. As it stands right now, primary part of the arm, secondary part of the arm, blade. So let's take a look at our blades. Going to get our blades object, navigate down to it, and I have a single blade here, which I am just going to, you know what, I'm going to take an instance of a blade. So I'll take an instance of a blade, place it as a child of the cube we just created, and I will zero all of its coordinates. So 0 position, 0 rotation. And we can then move it up to the front. Now I'm going to give it a little bit of a gap because I believe we will have a sort of a spinning articulating joint here, almost like a wrist. And so in this case, yes, we can reach a door in front of us quite easily. We can move the arm to this position without damaging our LiDAR. Let's see what else we can do. We can swing down. We can swing up. We probably have the ability to swing horizontally. So that will work. That is a large arm we're dealing with. So let's see. What about storing this arm? Well, we can fold it back onto itself about that far. Any further, we'd crush the batteries or damage the flywheel. And we can then fold this part of the arm forward. And perhaps we would even just leave these blades facing forward like a jousting mechanism, or we could even fold those back. So this would provide a pretty good idea of what the Razorback's main forward attack strategy would be. But my only worry is that this really doesn't translate into a drive-by. There's no way that this machine could damage something like an enemy vehicle while driving past it. In order to do that, we need another degree of freedom. And unfortunately, the degree of freedom we need is probably to go back to my original idea and tilt this entire thing outboard. So here's my thought. If we're going to tilt this entire part outboard, the pivot probably needs to lie higher than I have it on the frame. So if we move the pivot for this base cube upwards, and then from this view, we move the pivot outwards, it means that the pivot now sits almost on the frame. Now we can do that. Think of the hinge for your car's trunk. It's very similar. The hinge sort of almost curls under itself, and then when you open the trunk or the boot of the car, the trunk is actually able to pivot upwards and outwards like that. So something like this would work. The only problem I can see with a system like this is a problem of balance. So the question I'd ask myself at this point is, okay, so this machine has the ability to radically pivot its entire arm upwards and outwards. What exactly does that mean for balance, center of gravity? Now, this thing is being driven by a robot, which means it can compensate for that much better than a human could. Just like a stunt rider can lean off of one side of the bike while pushing the bike the other way, we can do that. But it would probably be a lot more practical and cool looking if when this happened, both arms did it. Now already these arms are huge, large and heavy, and they're probably pretty impractical. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start by just scaling all of this down. Cool little fact for you, because the instance doesn't actually have dimensions, it has scale, which is set to 1. You can scale the arm down, but the blade stays the same size. Just a little tidbit. So assuming a best case scenario for the weight of this arm, I'm just going to guesstimate that the largest we could probably make it is that, without doing any severe damage to the maneuverability of this bike, which is probably already hampered. So I'm just going to do another test. If we were to push this arm all the way forward and fully extend it, we can still damage something that's in front of us. But we've established that that's sort of a secondary concern for this machine, so I think the scale is good. Let's just imagine that we have an articulating part there, and that we have these two parts that fold. So now that we have all these proxies, we have a wall, and we have the cubes here. I'm just going to group these cubes into a hierarchy like I love to do. And actually, I'm not going to group them into a hierarchy. I'm just going to create a new null object and then drag them into that. That way, the null object is at the world center. So we just put our null there. And we can then, I think if you hold on Alt and choose symmetry, it creates it as a child, which is a nice shortcut. So we can then take our cube and say, okay, the machine is about to swing its arms outboard, and now we have this. Now this machine is starting to look really evil, almost insect-like, like a mantis. This is good. I like how that looks. So I think the mechanism would probably be some sort of a hydraulic mechanism that extends upwards. Maybe even part of the mechanism can poke skywards. That would look pretty cool. And I think that the arms should be able to pivot as far out as this, I think. You know, I think, like, I'm thinking of action shots, and there might be one shot where the machine is coming around the corner and it sees that it's going to scrape something, so it sort of pulls the arm inwards like this. Having a bit of problems selecting this instance. So it would sort of pull the arm in like this, and maybe you see the tip of the blade scrape the ground as it makes a sharp turn. And that's sort of what I'm thinking. So a system like this, I think, would work, and I think it still looks like a Razorback. It looks almost humanoid at this part, or like some sort of an insect or an animal. So it has that terrifying factor. So I think we're going to leave it at this point. Seems like a good place to stop the screencast. We know that we have cubes that we'd like to rotate inboard and outboard. Oh, you know what? Before I wrap it up, there's one more thing I'd like to test. So what if the arms are outboard like this? Move that part of the arm forward a little bit, and then we move this part of the arm pivot this way. It looks like we can indeed reach this blade. I'm not sure if we can reach the others. Maybe this is something we can solve with the articulating endpoint. Either way, I think this is a good place to stop. And I'm trying to make these screencasts shorter because a 40-minute screencast is a very intimidating thing when looking at a video. And we're all busy and have lots of things to do. So, until next time, where we'll probably be talking more about the detail of the robotic arms, I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you then.